Hundreds of people have marched in Kyiv, southern Tunisia, protesting against a government-owned phosphate plant accused of emitting poisonous gas and radioactive waste that can cause cancer. Thousands of workers joined a general strike as protests continue in the city of 400,000 population following government backtrack on promised plant shutdown. A head-on collision between two buses on Uganda's highway between Kampala and Gulu has killed at least 63 people, according to local police. The accident occurred just after midnight when both buses attempted to overtake other vehicles, leading to the tragic crash. At least 35 people were killed after a fuel tanker overturned and exploded in Nigeria's northern Niger state yesterday. As reported by the local Federal Road Safety Corps, authorities said the tanker spilled petrol that ignited shortly after the crash, highlighting Nigeria's ongoing road safety crisis and heavy fuel transport by road. Madagascar's Gen Z protesters have condemned Colonel Michael Randrianarima's appointment of businessman Herind Salama Rajaonari Bello as Prime Minister, calling it a betrayal of their demand for change. The youth movement vowed to keep mobilizing against what they describe as old practices in new clothes. The UN World Food Programme has warned that food supplies entering Gaza remain far below the daily target of 2,000 tons, with only 2 crossings open and none to the famine-hit north, despite a US-brokered ceasefire. Boeing has received orders for 9 CH-47F Block II Chinook helicopters from the U.S. Army worth $461 million, according to the company. This order brings the total number of CH-47F Block II aircraft under contract to 18 aircrafts. The anticipated Putin-Trump summit in Budapest is on hold after Russia rejected a ceasefire proposal following the postponement of a Rubio-Lavrov meeting. Meanwhile, a report by the International Service for Human Rights has revealed that China and Russia have repeatedly sought to defund UN human rights programs over the past 5 years. Russian strikes on Kyiv targeting energy facilities killed 2 and ignited fires across nearly half the city's districts. Ukrainian officials say the Putin-Trump summit is shelved after Moscow rejected a ceasefire amid escalating tensions between Russia, US, and Ukraine. Paris Louvre Museum has reopened now 3 days after the thieves stole historic jewels worth an estimated 88 million euros, which is $102 million. Visitors have now returned to the world's famous museum as authorities continue investigating the high-profile heist. Now we start from the Ivory Coast. In Ivory Coast, tensions are rising as President Alassane Ouattara seeks a 4th term in office ahead of the country's October 25th election. The 83-year-old leader's decision has sparked protest in Abidjan and other cities, leading to arrests and a government ban on demonstrations. Several key opposition figures have been disqualified, including former President Laurent Gbagbo and former banker Tidjane Thiam, raising concerns about a fair vote. Authorities have deployed tens of thousands of security personnel across the country as the opposition calls for transparency. The election comes amid growing frustration over rising living costs and fears of political unrest in one of the West Africa's largest economies. Now for this discussion, we are welcoming Desmond Majekodunmi. He's a political and environment activist, joins us live from Lagos, Nigeria. Thank you very much, Desmond, for joining me again. Good to see you. Now, how is this news taken in Africa? Is this President Ouattara's bid for a 4th term and disqualification of key opposition figures Is this seen as legitimate or popular, and how does it affect the legitimacy of the upcoming election in Ivory Coast?
Yes, it's a most unfortunate activity that's going on. We've seen it happen over and over again in different countries when the leadership gets too entrenched in the position of power and also have control over the machineries of power. They tend to want to just keep on prolonging their leadership, and it impacts very negatively because you get too many tight corners where just a few people are controlling all the reins and all the economy. It doesn't bode well for that particular country at all, and it could degenerate into something rather terrible for the place. One just hopes that other African nations will intervene and try to ameliorate what could be a really terrible problem for Ivory Coast. One really, really hopes that he does not manipulate the whole democracy. In a lot of these countries, we don't even call it democracy. We call it a demonstration of crazy, democracy, because it has very little to do with the people's power.
Wow, that's a new word for my dictionary. Thank you, Desmond, for sharing that word. And Desmond, as you mentioned, that other African leaders could be a help to Ivory Coast. Is there any other African nation in particular that can intervene and make sure the democratic election does take place?
Yes, that's a good question. It's quite delicate because you can't sort of go in there and invade the country, but one could hopefully put enough pressure on the people who are surrounding the leadership. And quite frankly, a country like Nigeria that has been able to transit from military rule to civilian rule a couple of times, but it's been in a civilian democracy for quite a while, and also been able to transit from one ruling party to the opposition party coming into leadership. And Nigeria does have quite a strong voice in the African Union, especially the West African Union. So hopefully she'll be able to exert enough pressure and let sensible people in Ivory Coast realize that this is not the way to go. The man is elderly. He deserves to be able to retire and enjoy his old age instead of, it looks like, forcing his way in, because the kind of bans that we're seeing on demonstrations and arrests of people and so on, it's not the best at all. So one is hopeful that countries like Nigeria will be able to exert the necessary pressure to avoid what could be a very volatile situation.
And Desmond, lastly, is there any other international organization or any other country across the world that can play in ensuring a fair electoral process in Ivory Coast?
Yes, again, it's a delicate situation because you are talking with a sovereign nation. And whilst the United Nations, does have some influence, and of course, United States of America has considerable influence, it's difficult. It's very, very difficult. And one just really, really, really hopes that the people themselves can be persuaded, the people in the Ivory Coast can be persuaded to be brave, to be strong, and in some cases, it might be quite sacrificial to just stand firm. And if they do, once you have enough numbers on your side, and another way, of course, is to use the media, like your media. The electronic media is a very powerful tool now. It's getting more and more powerful. Here we are communicating thousands of kilometers across the world as if we're face to face. And media is a very, very effective way of getting this message across to the people of the Ivory Coast that, stand firm, stand strong, and it's not too late yet.
Yes, that's the message we give. Thank you very much, Desmond, for joining us and sharing that insight. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we move on. Anwar Gargash, the diplomatic advisor to the UAE's president, has called for an immediate ceasefire in Sudan during the Reuters Next Gulf Summit in Abu Dhabi. Gargash has emphasized that Sudan's future must be centered on a civilian-led transition rather than a military junta. He has criticized the current inability of the UAE to provide humanitarian support in Sudan, contrasting this with its active role in Gaza. However, Gargash has expressed the UAE's willingness to scale up aid once permitted. Sudan has been embroiled in conflict between the army and the paramilitary rapid support forces since April 2023, triggering a severe humanitarian crisis. The RSF is currently pushing for control of Al-Fashir, the army's last stronghold in Darfur, with the goal of establishing a rival government. Tensions between Sudan and the UAE have risen, with the Sudanese army accusing the UAE of supporting the RSF with advanced weapons and mercenaries, a claim the UAE has denied.
Are calling for an immediate ceasefire. We are calling for scaling humanitarian support. And most importantly, we don't see the future of Sudan in a military junta. We see the future in Sudan in a civilian transition. On the humanitarian side, we're working on the margins because we are not allowed to go in, and conditions also in Sudan itself is not allowing us to play the role that we are playing in Gaza. It's interesting that an Israeli government is allowing us to put all this aid in Gaza, while the Sudanese general is not allowing us to do that. Very interesting, but sad.
Now we move on to our next news. Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto has held a bilateral meeting with South African President Cyril Ramaphosa at the State Palace in Jakarta. The leaders have discussed strengthening cooperation in the fields of economy, trade, and investment, as well as they have exchanged views on global issues of mutual concern. The president of South Korea has invited the Indonesian ministers to South Korea. Both leaders have spoken about enhancing their partnership. Let's listen into what the two have said.
We would like to strengthen this relationship, to enhance this. We are both big countries of the South. We joined BRICS, and we want to see more closer relationship. We consider South Africa to be a strategic partner in Africa. You are a great leader in Africa, and I think Africa is the future rising economy and rising continent.
We look forward to working closely with Indonesia and all other BRICS countries and partner countries on shared priorities such as driving much needed global reforms. The BRICS economic partnership also provides a great potential to support development and transformation in our countries.
Now for this discussion, we welcome back Desmond Majeko-Dunmi. He's a political and environmental activist, joins us live from Lagos. Thank you very much, Desmond, for joining us again. Good to see you. Desmond, now what strategic benefits can Indonesia and South Africa both gain from deepening economic, trade, and investment cooperation?
No, it's fantastic when we see this type of alignments with various countries. That's the way it's supposed to be. And, you know, both of them have quite vigorous, good economies. The government representation there is reasonably good for the people, fairly democratic. So one is very, very encouraged to see this, and one hopes that others will emulate, because that's where the world needs to go.
And what do you think, what could be a challenge? Yes.
With trade relationships.
Now it seems like we have a network issue with Desmond, but Desmond, thank you very much for staying with us throughout our news discussion. Thank you. Now we move on to our next news. A general strike and tens of thousands of protesters have brought the southern Tunisian city of Kyiv to a standstill. The strike was in support of the demands to close a chemical plant which has been blamed for pollution in the area. This latest wave of environmental and anti-government protests, driven by a deepening economic crisis, has become the most significant challenge to President Kais Saied since he assumed full power in 2021. Shops, markets, schools, and cafes were closed during the strike, paralyzing economic activity in Kyiv. Protesters marched through the streets with banners and chanted anti-government and anti-president slogans. They have condemned the environmental damage caused by the CGT phosphate plant. President Saied, in an attempt to calm the situation, previously stated that Kyiv is suffering an environmental assassination due to the actions of former governments, blaming them for increased cases of cancer, respiratory issues, and damage to local ecosystems. However, protesters have rejected his stance, arguing that the government must close the chemical plant to prevent further damage to the environment and public health. Let's listen into some protesters has said.
ضرنا برشا التلوث من نواحي الكل ماديين ومعنويين كما يقولوا شنو فلاحتنا جابس كلها معناها ما عادش لها لا حول ولا قوه وزاد الضر الصغار معناها قبل سكتنا حتى نتكلموا لكن ما سمعنا حد اما انت ويتك حكم شيء ولا ناس صغارنا والصغارنا ملوحه في السبيطارات هذوك مش مالينا حتى كان هني من جاره مثلا هذوك مش اخواتي لي
خرجوا يحبوا يطالبوا بتفكيك الوحدات وهذا في بالو حق المشروع وان شاء الله السيد رئيس الجمهوريه اكيد لو سمعنا واكيد لازم يلقى الحل.
At least 30 people have been killed in an oil tanker explosion in Nigeria's central Niger state after the vehicle skidded off the road and crashed, spilling fuel. The accident occurred near the Esan and Badegi communities along the Bida Agai Road in the Kacha local government area of Niger State as the villagers rushed to collect fuel from the overturned tanker, which suddenly exploded, setting off a massive fire that engulfed them. The intense blaze burned many victims beyond recognition, and the injured were taken to a nearby hospital for treatment. According to reports, the tanker was carrying petroleum products from Lagos to southern Nigeria to the north and is said that to have crashed due to the bad condition of the road. At least 30 people have been killed in an oil tanker explosion in Nigeria's central Niger state after the vehicle skidded off the road and crashed, spilling fuel. The accident occurred near the Asan and Badegi communities along the Bida Agai Road in the Kacha local government area of Niger State as the villagers rushed to collect fuel from the overturned tanker, which suddenly exploded, setting off a massive fire that engulfed them. The intense blaze burned many victims beyond recognition, and the injured were taken into a nearby hospital for treatment. According to reports, the tanker was carrying petroleum products from Lagos in southern Nigeria to the north and is said to have crashed due to the bad condition of the road. Now we move on to our next news. Moving to France, the Louvre Museum in Paris have reopened on Wednesday, 3 days after a historic royal jewelry heist. The Apollo Gallery, where the theft occurred on Sunday, remains closed. 8 pieces of jewelry valued at an estimated 88 million euros were stolen. 4 thieves used a truck-mounted ladder and power tools to enter the museum